Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Govs on the Go Alumni Edition, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the Dean of the college. I'm also the host of the podcast. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Zacharie Kinslow, who is a graduate in history back in 2019. And Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And I don't know if I said this, but it was a master's degree in history that you achieved in 2019. And we're going to talk about your life here in Clarksville, as well as what you're currently doing. Let's get an update. Where are you and what's going on?
I am currently, since 2020, I've been serving as the executive director of the Governor Frank G. Clement Railroad Hotel Museum at the Hotel Halbrook State Historic Site in Dickson, Tennessee. So not too far from Clarksville, but I'm loving it, and we're doing great things here.
Yeah, Dickson's a lovely town. My wife and I visited one time, and we thought we're gonna return, and now I have another place to go to.
So we have to have you here. Got to have you in.
Well, we're gonna get into what your job is like, but we're gonna go back in time and talk a little bit about growing up. You said you're from a small rural town,
Yep.
Mount Pleasant, but you're actually, because of all your relatives that
Yep.
were kind of in that area, you felt like you had a regional sort of mix, which I think is really neat. But can you talk a little bit about how growing up in a small town impacted you?
And absolutely. As you mentioned, I tell people I'm from Murray County originally when they first ask. And then we kind of whittle it down from there. From Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, is what I would call my hometown. But dad's family was all from Columbia. Mom's family was all from Spring Hill. I had a set of grandparents that were from Duck River, Tennessee, and Hickman County, kind of the Shady Grove community. So kind of grew up all over really that region there. Mount Pleasant is a very small rural town. Early 20th century, it was pretty booming. It was the phosphate capital of the world.
Okay.
So all the biggest houses are the oldest houses in town. And when the phosphate kind of ran out, well, so did the people that were funding the operation, and they kind of left. So economically, they saw a bit of a decline in kind of the mid 20th century. Stayed a very small community. Well, I'll never forget it when my first month here at the Clement Museum, I did an interview with the Dickson Herald, a local newspaper, and I mentioned in it that I graduated in a class of 64. I was number 9 in the class out of 64 people that graduated total in 2013. But everybody that had read the paper thought it said the class of 64. Not a class of 64. So I was told how great I looked to be in my 70s.
Exactly.
When I started here at the Clement Museum. So it was a small rural community. You kind of knew everybody. It'd be one of those things where you'd walk home from school and it was maybe a little bit less than a mile. And by the time you got home, mom was asking you about why did you do this on the way home, kind of thing. And that's if mom was home. Mom and dad both work, so my brother and I were kind of latchkey kids. But it was a great experience. I made a lot of great friends that I still have today. I visit as often as I can, not as much as I would like to, but as often as I can. Mount Pleasant was just a really, really great community to grow up in, and I still love it today.
Yeah, you went to high school there as well, and can
I
you
did.
talk a little bit about kind of things that you were like to do when you're in high school, and what kind of activities you're involved in?
Yeah. So I've always kind of had a very big interest in history, government, civics, kind of things like that. The first book I ever actually remember reading cover to cover belonged to my grandmother. It was a book on U.S. presidents. And the last page, it was old enough, the last page wished our new president, Jimmy Carter, good luck on his administration. So it was about 1976, 77 is when that one came out. So I was pretty involved in kind of like the little history clubs they had. Kind of took every class that you could with history or kind of US government civics, things like that. Um, Extracurricular, believe it or not, I was involved very much with the FFA during my high school career, which if
Sure.
when I tell people that now, they tend to giggle because I'm not anywhere near a farmer in any sense of the term. But it kind of taught you some of that leadership and public speaking
I sure did.
roles, parliamentary procedure, things like that. And um, played tennis, wasn't on the team. I was a very heavy child. I lost over 200 pounds after high school. So played tennis, but not with the team kind of thing. Um, I remember, looking back, being very involved, but nothing with something very, very specific kind of school-based organization, really outside of kind of FFA and those things that I kind of already had mentioned there,
Yeah. But I
civic
think that's
government wise.
interesting that you said the first book you read cover to cover was a
Yeah,
presidential book, which
yeah,
obviously now, I mean, foretold your history, your future in
yeah,
history, and the connection also with the fascination that you sort of had with presidents, and and I
oh
think
yeah,
that's really neat. I think it's also interesting that uh, early on you developed, I think, a work ethic, and I think that's really important for a
yeah,
young person to build, I think, a record of employment and
yeah.
how important that is. Can you talk about, how you
Uh,
came into that? What was your
no,
first job?
absolutely. My first job I ever had was there was a game room originally in Mount Pleasant. It was called Tiger Nation, and it opened up. And I mean, it was old enough. It was like an Xbox and a pool table. I kind of worked the door for that for maybe a month, and then the first bigger job I had was there is a unincorporated community kind of on the Hickman and Murray County lines called Sawdust, Tennessee. And there is a place there called Possum Holler Garage.
Okay.
It is owned by a very eccentric redneck named Max Davis, and he prefers that term redneck, so it's the one I used. He does restoration, so car restoration, things like that. My grandfather is a mechanic. And so Max would restore things, but Grandpa would make them work.
Okay.
And so that's how I came into kind of contact with it. And he would pay me to cut his his grass, and I say that as in it was several acres that I would cut and then spray the weeds, pull those, wash cars, those kinds of things. And then from there, getting other jobs. I worked in restaurants. My family is very work oriented. My grandparents always instilled the idea of working. My grandfather, Charles Williams Papa, before he died, he retired, but would still go to work.
Hmm.
He retired, but he was a machinist, very good at it. So every now and again, he would get called back in and come do some jobs for them. Um, my mom and dad always very, very hard workers. Dad did HVAC when I was a kid. When I was in high school, he switched to nursing. Big kind of jump there.
Oh,
Mom was always a waitress. Growing up, we were we were very middle class, and then '08 happened,
yeah.
and we kind of went down a little bit in status. So we were kind of middle to lower class as far as it goes. Growing up, I never really kind of realized how little we maybe had. I never felt that we went without. Mom and dad always made sure that we had what we needed. But we also didn't have kind of the extras that kind of came with life. So mom and dad were very big about us working, about us getting an education if we could. And mom, one saying that I have that mom always had is, you got to do what you got to do till you don't have to do it anymore. You may not like the job you have, but it's going to pay your bills until you get a better job that you like. And so I've always kind of carried that philosophy through with me that I may not be happy with my situation at the moment, but if I can just work through it, I'll be able to get somewhere else.
That's right. And I think that's important for a young person to learn that they can learn from every job that they take along that journey
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
pick up. But at some point in time, you must have had some inclination that you are an excellent storyteller. You have you have the ability, even with the whole. I thought you were making up the possum holler and the but you were able to just seize upon some of the key points of that to build that story. And I think when did you recognize that you had that ability?
I've always liked talking to people. My best friend, Randy Brooks, I'd go to school and I'd tell stories about my family, things like that. And I'll never forget. I remember in high school, he had come over to my grandmother's house and he met my grandmother. And then like the next day, he was like, "Hey, I'm sorry." And I said, "For what?" He goes, "I always thought you were making these stories up." Um, and he goes, "I met your family, and that it's pretty real." Um, my family can be eccentric at times.
Yeah.
I've just always enjoyed it. I went to a performing arts middle school. And so one of the things was everybody had to be involved in kind of like a school play, whether it was through choir or drama or dance or lighting, things like that, or set design, whatever. And so as a kid, I was put on stage and learned how to kind of talk to an audience. My philosophy of history is it's about 75% performative. Um, but Dr. Hood, I'm sure, have you ever been to a history conference?
I am not. No.
They are the most boring things you can ever attend. You've got historians who are sitting at a table reading their paper. So what I didn't, I would always put the paper down and I thought to myself, if I'm presenting it, I already know it, so I don't need to read it.
That's right.
I can just present you the information. I just enjoy telling the story, giving that information to people. One thing I did, and I always used to say it when I worked at the President James K. Polk Home Museum in Columbia, Tennessee, was I would prefer to work here than Lincoln's Place because everybody already knows Lincoln's story.
That's right.
I get to share something new with you, something exciting, something that I can get you excited about. And here around the Clement, it's all about visitor experience. If I can't get excited about what I'm telling you, I can't expect you to get excited about it.
That's right. And that passion just comes through naturally.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So let's talk about how you then developed because you graduated high school and I think you were the class president.
I was class president and I was prom king. So I was able
Okay.
to get elected twice that year.
Nice.
Uh, uh,
So you journeyed, but you went to a community college
I
and
did.
you kept working along the way too.
I did. I always kept a series of jobs um, during during my college years. I graduated in 2013. That summer, we were really trying to figure out how to pay for college. That was kind of a big thing, is we didn't have the money for me to go to a college that I just wanted to go to. We didn't have that luxury. Um, the Pell Grant was extremely important in my life and my career. Um, and that's something that when I do talks, I try not to get, with my job and everything, I try not to get political in these things. Sometimes it depends on the audience I'm speaking to and who I've been invited to speak with. The Pell Grant originally provided about 80% of college tuition coverage when it was originally introduced. By the time I was applying for it, it was maybe 30%. I
Mm.
think maybe 20% now. I haven't really checked since I quit using it. But that was able to cover, and this is before Tennessee Promise. The Pell Grant combined with the Hope Scholarship allowed me to attend community college at no cost to myself or my family. Um, when I first, had the benefit of actually living in Columbia, Tennessee, and I'll actually tie out everything we're going to talk about. I'll actually tie together here at the end. Benefit of living in Columbia, Tennessee, Columbia State Community College, the main Columbia campus is right there in town. So I applied, I got in, filled out all the paperwork, did the Pell Grant. Mom and Dad were poor enough that, was able to get the full amount out of that there. I did my 2 years at Columbia State. Went straight through history degree. I knew that's what I wanted to go into. I'd always liked history. I always felt like I was good at history. The classes that when you're kind of your first 2 years, you're doing a lot of prerequisites to kind of get ready for the next 2 years.
Right.
The history portions of those classes tended to be where I excelled, and then I kind of receded back. I mentioned one of the sciences I took was astronomy, and the first 2 weeks I was the top student. We
I,
were talking about the history of astronomy.
hmm
What Copernicus and all of them were talking about. Once we started doing math, they'll then kind of went down a little bit from there. I greatly enjoyed my time at Columbia State. Each college I went to opened a door that you don't expect it to open. Didn't expect it to go to. I went to three different colleges. Each degree I had came from a kind of went each step up as far as that was concerned there. But yeah, Columbia State was my first 2 years there.
and I think you mentioned that you had an assignment that
Hmm.
actually led into something again that helped,
Yeah,
give you an idea of where your career was headed.
yeah. Dr. Barry Gidcombe, head of the history department at Columbia State, still a great friend of mine. I saw him not that long ago. Dr. Barry Gidcombe did an assignment where every one of his history students had to visit, I think it was three historic sites in Murray County. I think at the time, I think he's expanded it to around Murray County. Um, but in Murray County, and Murray County has a plethora of historic sites compared to maybe some other counties there. And I remember I had visited the Athenaeum, which was a former girls' school in Murray County, Ripa Villa, which was a Civil War plantation site in Spring Hill, and then the President James K. Polk Home and Museum, which I had visited many times growing up. In Murray County, you got a presidential site, and you've got a guy that is interested in the presidency. So toured that, and the Polk Home, if you've ever been to it, is a smaller site. Um, Toured it. I was the only person on tour, and because I had been through it multiple times and had read so much about the era, Barbara was. I remember Barbara was actually the tour guide. Going through tour, it was more of a conversation. When you get one person on tour, you don't get the big here is all this. It's more of a conversation. And by the end of the tour, she goes, "You really are. You know a lot of this. You should apply." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll apply." So I went in after the tour and I talked with the director of the Polk Home, John Holtzapfel, who has since retired. He lives in Pennsylvania now. Um, and he took the application, and I did not get hired for the next year and a half. But to remind them that I was interested, as I went in for a tour twice a month, every month for the next year and a half, to remind them that I was interested in a job there. And so I eventually was hired. In 2015, I was hired. Um, and I worked at the Polk Home for just under 5 years, working my way up from being just a tour guide and a docent to eventually I left. I was the museum educator. So I was the person kind of running the education department by that point. And then for a brief period last year, about 6 months, I was the curator of the Polk Home on an interim basis while they were in between curators at that time, but all while keeping another full-time job and going to college. So loved every minute of working at the Polk Home. In fact,
Yeah.
I'm still April 25th next week. I've got an event that I'm doing with them there too. So I still stay very involved with that site.
Well, I hope our students that may be listening or watching understand that, there are a couple lessons that they could learn from that is that, if you really want something, you should stick to it and continue to chase that, which I certainly appreciate your frequent visits to remind them that you were available. But I think that also being aware that opportunities are available around you, and
Yeah,
sometimes seeking those out and walking through that door as you did, and and taking that chance and seeing how that developed into your future. I think
absolutely.
that's really a great lesson, hopefully, that they can learn. So how did you end up? Because you must have finished your undergraduate degree,
Yep.
and then how did you end up at Austin Peay?
So I did. After Columbia State, I went to Martin Methodist, which is now UT Southern in Pulaski.
Okay.
And while working at the Polk Home, they had done an exhibit on Polk Place, which was the retirement home of President and First Lady Polk after the White House. So they had left the Polk Home, the Columbia area, and then moved to Washington. After Washington, they moved to Nashville, to a home which is no longer in existence. It was tore down in 1901. So it's called Polk Place. And James and Sarah Polk were slaveholders at the time. And they had done an exhibit at the Polk Home on their Nashville home, which is no longer in existence. And while taking it down, they had like a plat map drawing of the slave quarters. And I just had mentioned to the curator, well, who are these people? Who were the enslaved that were there? And he mentioned Tom Price. He said, a couple names, and he goes, and there was this one guy named Elias Polk who we don't really know a lot about, but it looks like he had a political career after emancipation. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I looked at, and nobody had ever written or done anything about his life and career.
Ooh.
So I thought, okay, I'm kind of interested in this. It ended up becoming my original research on it had become my capstone paper at Martin Methodist as my undergrad kind of work there. And it was a paper that I presented at the Phi Alpha Theta Regional Conference at UT Martin in 2017. And that day is something I will remember. Again, at the time, I was pretty well overweight at that point. Like I mentioned, I had lost 200 pounds between high school and now. I did not know that day that I was diabetic. I was starting to have symptoms of diabetes, but hadn't gotten the testing, so I didn't know it at the time. I presented my paper. I had won. It was like undergrad paper, top prize, whatever it was. Dr. Kevin Tanner in the history department at Austin Peay was when you go to a history conference like Phi Alpha Theta, you have the students who are presenting their papers, and then you have kind of like a moderator
Sure.
who's a professor in that field, and they kind of ask questions and get into that. And I'm telling this story. I don't know if he likes when I tell it, but I'm going to tell it. I had gotten the paper and everything. I had just a terrible headache, was sick to my stomach. I had just eaten, again, diabetic. Don't know that. And you also urinate a lot when you have diabetes. So we're getting ready to leave UT Martin, and I stopped to go to the restroom. So I'm at the urinal, and I hear the door open. Someone else comes in, and Dr. Tanner is using another urinal. And before I leave, I hear him go, "Have you ever thought about grad school?" So there at the urinal, we hashed out a plan. He mentioned that there was, GTA scholarships, things like that, graduate teaching assistantships, and that he really thinks that I would do great with it at Austin Peay. And I originally had not intended on going to grad school. Some things that actually happened over that summer that I thought, well, I need to do something else. And pretty much 2 weeks before the semester started, I reached out to Dr. Tanner again and was like, "Hey, is that position still open?" And he goes, "I've been holding it for you."
You're kidding
So
me.
I must have made that much of an impact
Yeah.
on him there. And I started 3 weeks later, I was in Clarksville, um, working at Austin Peay and going to school full time.
Wow. And I love that you mentioned one of the first things you mentioned about your time here at Austin Peay was your memories of the other GTAs
Absolutely.
that you were working alongside. Can you talk a little bit about those relationships?
100%. That made the difference for me. When I first got to Clarksville, I absolutely hated it. I hated every minute of being there, hated every minute of being on campus, could not stand to walk past that big statue that sits out in front of the UC. Um, I didn't make friends. I didn't talk to people. I would go to class, I'd go home, I'd keep a tally in a notebook of how many days were left in the semester just to try to get through it. And then I started talking to people, and all of a sudden I became a lot more comfortable and really started to like Clarksville and very much enjoyed the place. In fact, if I had the opportunity to move back to Clarksville today, I absolutely would do it 100%. Um, I was commuting for a while between Dickson. Dad had moved to Dickson by that point, and Clarksville is about 2 hours away from Columbia. Um, so working, keeping jobs at the Polk Home and a restaurant, going to school in Clarksville, Dickson was a great halfway point
Yeah.
for everything there. And working in the GTA office at for the history department in the Marks building, small office. In fact, the room I'm sitting in is probably about the size of the office, and we had 9 people working in it.
That sounds right.
Um, and several of them I still really keep in contact with today. My best friend, who I'm actually going to go see, not this weekend, the weekend after, Keith Cheesem. My desk was here. Keith sat right next to me. I think that we were the only 2 men in the office, so I think that's kind of how we just gravitated, or how the women just kind of forced us into the corner. Um, we had become friends, would go hang out, would do things, and he turned around one day and he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, man, I'm getting a divorce." And I said, "Oh, I no, I said, I'm Keith. I'm sorry. I really hate to hear that." He said, "No," he said, "It's been kind of coming. It's kind of mutual. We're getting along, but we kind of agree it's ending." And he goes, "When she moves out, my stepdaughter is, of course, going with her mother, which means I'll have a room opening up, and you're commuting." He said, "Do you want to live 5 minutes from campus?"
Wow.
He said, $300 a month, room and board. And I said, "Well, you can't beat that. Yeah, I'll do it." And moved to Clarksville and ended up living there for the next about 3.5 years. Um, Stayed there. Keith is still absolutely my great friend. He's from Indiana. He November of 2020, he said, "Hey, I got to tell you something. You're going to need a new place to live, because I am been getting more serious with my high school sweetheart, and I'm moving back home to Indiana to be with her." And I said, "Well, this works out, because I guess I'm moving back to Dickson to work at this place that just hired me called the Clement." And so about once or twice a year, I'll go up to Indiana and visit him and his family, who I still see pretty closely. Sarah Alexander, sat at the other end of the room from me. Teresa Watts sat next to me. Beth Basiglia. I still talk to all of these people greatly. They all made a great impact. We formed study groups. I mean, it was one of those things where you're at kind of like a diner at 2 o'clock in the morning, cramming in information for a class you're all in, and then everybody kind of stops and goes, "Isn't this what college is supposed to look like in the
Yes.
movies? Isn't this what it is?" I mean, I have friends that I have made that I am still, I still love, and I still see. I was in Key Sweating in 2022. So, I mean, it greatly impacted me. The people made the difference for me. I can't say that I would have actually have finished and went through grad school like I did had I not made the friends that I had made.
Yes, I agree that those things are what will make a difference for people in continuing on, and so that's good to hear. And you had let's talk a little bit about some of the professors that you enjoyed taking.
Yep. Yeah,
Who did you
specifically
like?
at Austin Peay.
Yeah.
Um, Kelly Jones was my first. Now she's no longer there. She taught at Austin Peay at the time. She's at Arkansas Tech now. She was my first advisor, and then I had become very close under the advisorship of Kevin Tanner. We kind of did that same time period. And if I ever visit campus again, which I'll do from time to time, I'll kind of pop into his office and see him. Manoa Uffelman
Oh,
was very close under her. Dr. Wesley, Tim Wesley, um, loved his classes. Those three were actually on my grad panel. Uffelman, Wesley, and Tanner. I was a graduate teaching assistant for Dr. David Snyder at one point. Greg Zirin. In fact, I remember one time, because I wrote a lot about Polk, and I just kept expanding my Elias Polk research. It ended up being my master's thesis and other things later on. And when I took research methods, um, I submitted something about, "Oh, I'm going to write about James Polk and this," and his response, I'll never forget the email I got back. He said, "Zach, this is a research methods class. We get it. You're the Polk guy. We know you can do that. Write something else, please." So so I did. But yeah, it was. I had some really great professors. Cameron Sutt. I never had him, but he was. I think he was kind of overseeing a lot of the history department
Yes, he
when
was the
I
chair.
was
Sure.
chair. Yeah, when I was there. Um, Great guy. Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun time. Really great professors that really each one taught me a different lesson. I will say the hardest professor, the hardest class I ever taught or took, um, was under Dr. Butts. Made an A in the class, but I had to work for that. It was great.
He is serious.
Um,
That's right.
she was very serious about and not saying the other ones weren't,
No, but she's
but she made sure I learned the information. That was something that was, yeah, absolutely.
yes. As you transitioned from after you
Yep.
completed your degree and into your current role, you also give a lot of attribution to the folks at the Polk Home for
Yep.
helping your development. Can you talk a little bit about how they impacted you as well?
We absolutely. So I am the executive director of a state museum here in Dickson today. I did not go to school for public history. I'm not sure. I don't think Austin P actually has a public history
We're
course. That
developing
maybe
some
you're
classes.
developing new. So
Mhm.
there you go. So didn't have it when I was there really at
Right.
all. Um, so all of my experience working in the museum field and public history has really been on the job training. I had become very close and under the mentorship of the director of the Polk Home, John Holtzapfel, but even more so the curator of the Polk Home at the time, Tom Price, who's now the director of the archives in Murray County, doing a great job down there. Tom kind of took me under his wing. And all these people that I've mentioned throughout this have been a mentor in some shape or form that have made a huge impact on me. Tom, I like to say, is my main mentor, my lead mentor, and he has referred to me as his protege at times. Tom taught me how to run museums, how to work in museums, how to interact with the public, how to tell the story. Because that's kind of what a museum does.
Yes.
You know, we tell a specific story with a specific interpretation that keeps and collects that record for kind of whatever we're talking about. He taught me how to create an exhibit. He taught me how to kind of pull these things together, how to make contacts and keep them and then follow up with these things. How to research outside of what you're going to be doing in a paper for a class. The writing that I do on these exhibit panels and grants and things like today, I credit greatly to Austin P. Um, Finding the artifacts to put on display, that takes a different set of researching skills than just archival work, things like that. They made an impact on me, and to the point where I've had Tom come out and speak here at the Clement, and then my staff will come up to me afterwards and go, "I see where you learned it.
Mm.
He's guys, you talk like he does." When you present. Um, I owe a lot to the Polk Home. Not just to put it on my resume. Having a presidential site is always a great thing to have on the resume. Papers of Martin Van Buren at Cumberland University was able to do a semester there through Austin P. They were able to get me. I was the only non-Cumberland student to work on them that year, um, and I got that through Austin P. there. Um, they made such an impact on me that even when I left at the end of 2019, I still hold a very special place in my heart for the Polk Home, and I will always be a member and associated with that site. They kind of taught me I wouldn't be where I'm at today without the Polk Home and their influence.
Okay, let's talk about how you got to your current position then, and what it was like transitioning into the role during COVID.
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, everything, and I tell the story when I don't know if it's me politicking or me not, but I tell them it's divine intervention that brought me here. Um, Grew up in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, went to Columbia State Community College. Columbia State Community College was the first community college established in the southeastern United States. Governor Frank G. Clement felt that working adults might want to go back to school, but there needed to be a cheaper local public option in your hometown that would work around the schedule of an adult with a job, and a community college kind of fit that bill. So he created that system here. The humanities building at Columbia State was the Clement building. Then went to Martin Methodist, which the Colonial Hall, the administrative building, was the former home of Governor John C. Brown. So we got a governor connection there. And then went to Austin Peay State University, taught there for a year, full of governors. There's a Clement building on campus. I worked at Austin Peay as an adjunct professor during when things started back at 2020. I remember teaching classes, as I kind of mentioned to you at the very beginning here. Very, very beginning here was I was on campus the day that they went hybrid. So Zoom one day, you have some people that are going to be in person, some on Zoom, and then they kind of rotate throughout the week. And you have to wear a mask and teach, or a face shield, and you're also on Zoom talking. So it was quite a lot. And I was making good money. I'll say that. Because of COVID, the layoffs and the staff cuts and things like that, I was one of the few that was able to stay and do these things. And I'll never forget it. I had an email in November of 2020 from Dr. Cameron Sutt. And the email said, "I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is we are hiring back a lot of the staff we let go because of COVID. The bad news is we're hiring a lot of the staff back we got because of COVID, and they need hours, which means you get less." And I thought, well, that does absolutely make sense. And I thought, okay, so I'm sitting on the back porch in Clarksville. This was before Keith told me he was getting married and I had to move out. And I'm sitting there trying to think, how am I going to pay rent? How is this going to happen? Because with these hours I'm getting, I'm not going to be able to sustain that. 20 minutes after I had that email from Dr. Sutt, I got a second email. It was from my predecessor here at the Clement Museum. And it said, "Are you interested in a job?" Well, in 2018, when I worked at the Polk Home, I was the kind of head of their education, museum educator, and I created a kind of a promotional program for them where I would volunteer for free to drive to any area that would want me to do a program on James K. Polk and his home, to try to get people interested.
Sure.
In 2018, I had come to the Clement Museum and I had done one program for them. Their board president at the time, Daryl James, and his son later came and toured the Polk Home. And I must have made that much of an impact that 2 years later, they had remembered me. So I had gotten an email asking if I wanted a job. I was like, well, absolutely, yeah, I need a job, more of a job here. So let me reply yes, and we set up an interview. I did not actually know what I was interviewing for until I got to the interview. And you should have seen my surprise when I was told I was not interviewing to work under a director, but she was retiring and I was going to be the new director. So they take me in a room and introduce me to the county historian, the board president, board members, former U.S. Congressman Bob Clement, all interviewing me. An hour after I left the interview, I got a phone call and they said, "Well, we've kind of got a decision. We're pretty sure what we're going to do. We're not going to tell you what it is yet. I will call you tomorrow morning and tell you what our final decision is." And I said, okay. Again, I don't think Daryl likes when I tell this story, but I'll tell it anyway. The next morning I was in the shower and my phone rang and I thought, I can't miss it. So I just turned the water off and they offered me the job and I accepted. Right there in the shower.
Yeah, as God made you.
And as God made me, just, bare to nothing. And I started the following, it was 2 weeks later was my official start time. I had a medical procedure I went through, so I needed just a little bit of lead time. They knew I was getting into there. And I have been here since. And 2020 was actually whenever I tell people I started at the museum in 2020, their first reaction is, "Oh, that must have been awful." It was great for me. And I say that as in I had never been in that type of leadership role before
Right.
in a business setting. And so the slowness of 2020, because everything was still kind of shut down by the end of the year, and things were just starting to reopen. It was such a slow transition back to normal life that I could kind of get a feel for the job and get my feet under me by the time everything really opened up. By the time the building returned to normal and got busy, I had worked here for 9 months and understood the finances, understood how things were going to work, and were able to kind of develop in a role without being just thrown into a new job and, okay, here we go, let's make all these changes immediately, kind of thing.
So you definitely knew the storytelling part of the job,
Yes.
and you worked to make that part of what the museum is there. I think that you also talked a little bit about the challenge for you was learning the
Yeah,
fundraising part, which is
absolutely.
certainly a big challenge. I mean, no one's prepared for that part.
No, 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 absolutely. I went to school and got just a straight history degree, associates, bachelor's, master's. It was just history. Um, if I could go back, I would have taken maybe a couple business classes or something like that.
Hmm.
On the job training again is really one of those things. Fundraising, business administration were two things I really had no background in. You had mentioned, for students that every job and everything you kind of do is going to play a different role. I remember in my interview, I talked about working at the Polk Home and working at Austin Peay and working at the Van Buren papers. And then I also brought up that for 7 years I cooked in a restaurant. And I remember one of the people in the interview actually said, well, that doesn't really apply to this job. And I said, I think it does.
Yes.
I think it does because it teaches you timing. It teaches you communication skills. It teaches you attention to detail because I've got to get your food from raw to cooked correctly in about a 30-minute period, which means I've got to talk to everyone else around me and make sure that everything is running properly and smoothly. I said, I think it actually applies greatly to management
Yes.
um, as far as that goes. So I had kind of that idea and that background really when it came to it. When my first week, I met with a board member, Paula Elazar, who's a great friend of mine now here in Dickson, former board president here, she became. And I remember she's a businesswoman herself. She had ran communications for HCA. She owns a lodge here in Dickson. And I was talking to her, and she kind of just cut to it and goes, Zach, she goes, I get it. You know the history stuff. I don't care about that business. She said, you're running a business. Tell me about that. And I thought, I kind of was able to kind of talk my way through it. And I thought when she left, I thought, oh, I guess I really have to do this. Um, I work very closely under the mentorship here of former U.S. Congressman Bob Clement, who is the eldest son of Governor Frank Clement, who was born here at the museum. Bob knows more about fundraising than I could ever hope to. I'm continuing education completely. I've taken classes with the Center for Nonprofit Management, going to the Tennessee Association of Museums conference every year. You take these, kind of day courses and
Right.
management and business, things like that. Learning a lot about fundraising. One of the big things as far as fundraising that I learned from Bob Clement is never get discouraged with a no because you're one step closer to a yes. If you don't ask, you don't receive.
Sure.
You can never just expect somebody just to give it to you. You have to seek it out. Kind of like when I did when I wanted that job at the Polk Home. I just kept going until I finally got it. Since my time here at the Clement, we have gotten, I mean, this place was not in great shape, to be honest with you, when I started. I'm the eighth director since they opened in 2009. And while each one of my predecessors offered something great to the museum, I'm the first one that has a degree in history or had prior museum experience. Organize the team, help get a steady flow throughout the building of narrative. It was good, but it was very disjointed. What's the story we're here to tell? Kind of like writing a paper at Austin Peay. We can talk about everything, but what's the through line that we're getting here? So that's something directly from Austin Peay that I was able to translate directly here to this building. We have since, in the time that I have been here, We have increased our visitation to now we get anywhere on an average year, we get about 13,000 people a year. When I started, we were around 7,000. So we've almost
Okay.
doubled visitation since I started here in 2020. Um, we have increased fundraising. Every year we do our legacy event, a fundraiser here at the museum. It's also an award show where we honor and recognize individuals who have made a significant and positive impact in our community, our state, or our nation. We have been able to get bigger names to honor. For instance, last year we honored Bill Freeman, the philanthropist in Nashville who has since passed away. Judy Redden, distinguished citizen here in Dickson County. We've honored Jeannie Seeley, who holds the record for most appearances at the Grand Ole Opry. Mark Colley, country music singer. Um, Senator Lamar Alexander. But we have the first year we did that, we raised about $80,000. This last year, we raised $220,000 at that event. So you can see the growth there,
Yeah.
and the stability of the site and the security of the site is what matters to me. I want to make sure that this place is around here much longer than I will be,
That's good.
physically on the earth, not just at the site, but as longer than I'm alive, I want this place to be able to sustain itself, which meant focusing and growing the endowment account. When I started, the day I started, the endowment account was at $60,000. Today, it is at
Oh,
$1,070,000.
that's great.
So we have increased it more than $1 million in just about a 4-year span of time. Um, Not always the most comfortable doing that. I was grown up to you do not really talk finances with people. You don't ask for money. You go out and work for the money.
Hmm.
So even today, I'm not the most comfortable with fundraising, but I also understand that the parts of the job I really love to do, that storytelling, the history part, well, I've got to do the business stuff at a pretty high level to be able to do the history stuff that I really like to do. If I want to do an exhibit, we have an exhibit on the Vietnam War currently, as this year is the 50th anniversary of the end of the war. Well, where's the money going to come from that's going to pay for that? Where's the money that's going to come from that's going to pay my staff that helps me do all of these things? I don't just do it alone. I've got a great staff behind me. It's a lot of on-the-job training, and I've had a lot of great mentors from Daryl James to Paula Elazar to Bob Clement. I could not do what I do or be here where I'm at without these individuals from here at the Clement to my professors at Austin Peay, my friends that I made at Austin Peay, Columbia State, the Polk Home. Just throughout my entire life, I would not be exactly where I am doing what I do now had it not been that series of events that sometimes I felt were failures. I have failed many, many times. But looking back, each failure ended up leading to something that became a later success. If I had succeeded when I wanted to every time, I wouldn't be doing what I'm
That's
doing
right.
now. Wasn't happy about it at the time, but looking back, I'm glad I didn't get some of those jobs. I'm glad I didn't get some of those opportunities. It all just kind of works out if you work hard enough to do it.
Sure. And you're still a very young man, and I would
I,
say,
I turned 30 next month.
I would say that you have so much to look forward to. But sometimes, do you think back upon being grown up as a young person in Mount Pleasant and thinking, how did I end up? I mean,
I don't.
this is a pretty good story.
I don't. And I don't say that as in as I just don't is uh it's odd that I have made a career writing and talking about the lives of other people. But I also, I guess I'm not as good at talking about myself. Um, Mount Pleasant, it was a great, absolute great place to grow up, and the people that I graduated with have gone on to do amazing things. One of my best friends in high school, Drew Blocker, is one of the most successful realtors in Davidson County. My best friend Randy Brooks is a very talented, very hardworking. He's an extremely successful electrician. Works for a huge company. Deborah Gullidge has a PhD in astrophysics. Worked for Space Force and now contracts with the federal government. Um, so when I look at what they're doing, sometimes I feel, oh, maybe I need to step up my game. Coming from Mount Pleasant, it seems like we got some good stuff coming out of that community.
Evidently so.
Um, but it's also one of those things of, you know, it really doesn't matter where you come from. It really, it matters what you do with where you came from. It matters with what you do with your life. I could have, I could have been happy just staying in Mount Pleasant, working just a 9 to 5 at a low paying job, but it didn't work out that way for me. There's nothing wrong with that life if that's what makes you happy, if that's what you wish to do. Um, but no, I've never looked back and thought, how did I come out of Mount Pleasant and I'm where I'm at now? No, I've never looked at it in that light. I just kind of look at it as it's part of the greater story of where I am.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that story. And one of the last questions we always like to ask our alums, Zach, is recommendations that you might have for a student, maybe a student like yourself that was, considering
Yeah.
whether to go to grad school.
Um, I do recommend going as far with your education as you can possibly go. Um, Especially in today's world, a when my grandfather was doing, my age, a high school diploma could kind of get you the equivalent of what I'm doing right now. And then it kind of became a bachelor's degree, and who knows where it's going to go from there. It's becoming a much more competitive field. The more knowledge and background you have on a resume, something like that, that is really going to benefit you greatly. So if you can go as far with your education as you possibly can go, um, field experience is also just as good.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of opportunities that students can have if they open themselves up to it. I mentioned working at the papers of President Martin Van Buren at Cumberland University. That was something that was only available to me because I was a student at Austin Peay. You couldn't just get that position doing that job. They only offered it to college students. Um, it's also the only papers project in the country for a president that offers it to undergraduates too. So not just grad students are able to attend things like that. Look for those opportunities. Look for that work experience. Build up your resume so when you graduate, it's going to be easier to get that job. Just having the education portion on there, that's great. But what experience do you have in the field? It's kind of one of those things where, you got to, you're fresh out of college and they want you to have 20 years of, work experience to try to get in to a field, but you can take those opportunities that are available to you. Talk to your professors, get to know them. They want you to succeed
Yeah.
as much as you want to succeed. And they can talk to you about opportunities that maybe that you don't know about, point you in those directions. Get involved in the clubs on campus. Phi Alpha Theta was one that I was pretty involved in during my time. The Phi Alpha Theta Regional Conference led to a history paper talk in a restroom that led me to Austin Peay, which led me to the job I have now.
That's right.
Had I not been a member of Phi Alpha Theta on campus, I wouldn't be sitting in this office talking to you at this moment. So take advantage of every opportunity, get in as involved as you can, and have fun doing it. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're not going to enjoy anything that comes from it. And enjoy the ride. It goes very, very fast.
Yeah. Well said. And I thank you for sharing your story up to this point in your career. I think it's a great story and you do an excellent job telling it.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers out there for joining us on the podcast. Make sure and join us again as we continue to profile some of the outstanding alumni we have here in the College of Arts and Letters at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.